In this video series, I'll be walking you through how I created this interactive dashboard. All of this was done using Quarto, GitHub Actions, and GitHub Pages. It was completely free to create and to host, and all the interactivity that you see here is powered by observable JavaScript, without the need for a shiny server. This dashboard displays the Today's Top Hits playlist from Spotify, and is automatically updated every day at 9 a.m. without me needing to do anything at all. I never have to render any of this code locally, since GitHub Actions takes care of everything for me. And the code is 100% reproducible, because this project uses renv to manage all the R packages and package versions. I created this dashboard as my submission for Posit's 2024 table contest, and my idea with my submission was to combine as many different tricky components as possible into one Quarto project. Throughout this series, we'll talk about how to create and style Quarto dashboards, how to publish them for free using GitHub Pages, and how to automatically update them on a schedule of your choosing using GitHub Actions, how to include passwords and other confidential information as part of your GitHub Actions workflows, how to use observable.js to add interactivity to your dashboards, how to use the Hitter2 package to access APIs, and of course, how to use the GT package to create beautiful, interactive tables. This playlist contains 7 videos, and in this series, we'll build up this dashboard step by step from scratch. I've designed this playlist, though, in such a way that each topic has its own video that's fully self-contained. That means that you don't need to watch all 7 of the videos in this playlist in order to get value out of the video that you're currently watching. If you do watch all 7, though, you'll be able to completely reproduce this dashboard, and you'll also have all the tools you need to create a similar project of your own. My name is Melissa Van Bussel, and I make videos about R programming and data science. If you find these tutorials helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel, since it really helps me make more videos. Without further ado, let's jump into this video's topic. In this video, we'll learn how to publish a Quarto dashboard using GitHub Actions and GitHub Pages. And we're going to do it in a way where we never have to render anything locally. First, I'm going to create a new project. I'll select New Directory, Quarto Website, select the folder where I'd like the files to be saved locally, and give the directory a name. The name that you choose here is going to affect the URL of your project on GitHub Pages. The format that the URL will take is your GitHub username, followed by .github.io, followed by a slash, and then the name of the repository that you create here. I'm going to call this Spotify dashboard, which means that the URL for this dashboard is going to be melissavanbussel.github.io/Spotify-dashboard, and then slash whatever I name the Quarto file. For example, if I create a Quarto document called dashboard.qmd, then the final URL would be that big long string that I mentioned before, and then /dashboard.html. So make sure you choose the directory name carefully, since this will determine the URL that people use to navigate to your dashboard. Next, make sure that create a Git repository and use renv are both checked off, and then click Create Project. This is going to do most of the work for us, but there's a few changes that we're going to make. First, we're going to create a folder called .github, go inside of that folder and create a new folder called Workflows, go inside of that folder again and create a new blank text file and call it publish.yml. And this is the file that's going to tell GitHub Actions how to publish your content to GitHub Pages. To find the content that we're going to put into that publish.yml file, we're going to go to the GitHub Pages webpage of the Quarto documentation and scroll all the way down to this section that says Executing Code, and keep scrolling down until you see the section that says with renv. We're going to copy the entire code in this code cell to our clipboard and then paste it into the publish.yml file. And by default, what this is going to do is every single time that you push to this repository, on the main branch, it's going to automatically update the website and the dashboard for you without you needing to render anything locally. If you also want to be able to create a schedule where the website will be automatically updated at a time interval of your choosing, then you can set that up as well by typing schedule, enter, tab, cron. And then here is where we would need to put a cron expression where we would specify how often we want the website to be automatically updated. In this example, I'm going to ask GitHub Actions to automatically update my website and dashboard every single day at 9 a.m. And in order to figure out the cron expression for that, there are a couple of ways that you can do it. One is to Google cron expression maker and look at the syntax and try to come up with the expression. But the way that I prefer is to just use ChatGPT to generate the expression for me. So here I'm going to ask ChatGPT to generate a cron expression that will run every morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time. Note that GitHub Actions is going to be using UTC, which might be different from your local time zone. So that's why it's important to specify what time zone you want the expression to be for. And this is the expression that corresponds with every day at 9 a.m. during Eastern Daylight Savings Time. So I'm going to copy that expression and then paste it in here inside of quotes. And now what's going to happen is the website is going to be automatically updated every single time I make a commit to the main branch of the repository, as well as every single morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm going to save that file. And now, because we're creating a dashboard, we want to create a Quarto document that actually has the content that's going to go into the dashboard. Let's go to File, New File, Quarto document. And this is eventually going to be a dashboard that shows the Today's Top Hits playlist from Spotify. So I'm going to call this Today's Top Hits. Click on Create. And then to specify that we want this to be a dashboard, we'll type Format, Dashboard. And this is optional, but something that I like to do right off the bat is include a logo for the dashboard. But in order to include a logo, I'm going to need to have a logo in my project somewhere. So I'm going to create a new folder and call it Images. And this is where I'm going to store all of the images for this entire project. And then inside of that Images folder, I've gone ahead and put an image in there called logo.png, and it's the Spotify logo. So up here at the top of my Quarto document, I'm going to specify that I want the logo to be from the Images folder, and then it's the logo.png file. Next, I'm going to fill this Quarto document with some placeholder content just so we can get a basic dashboard up and running. We'll keep it really simple for now, and we'll build on this dashboard in future videos. I want my dashboard to have 2 columns, and I want the width of the first column to be 35%, and I want, therefore, the width of the second column to be 65%. And then in the second column, I want to create 3 rows. I want the first row to have a height of 10%. I want the second row to have a height of 70%. And then the third and final row will have a height of 20%. Now, because the highest level of organization in my dashboard is based on the columns, I'm also going to need to specify that I want the orientation of this dashboard to be based on columns rather than rows. Let's go ahead and add in some placeholder content. I've now added in placeholder text for each section of the dashboard. But let's say we also wanted to include some code and some code output somewhere in this dashboard. I'm going to add in a code cell, and I'm going to use this code chunk for loading packages, which means I don't want the output of this code chunk to show up in the dashboard. So I'm going to use the chunk options, echo is false, and then I'm also going to use include is false. And this will prevent any of the output from showing up in the dashboard. Next, I'm going to load the tidyverse. And then let's say I want to create a second code chunk And this time I do want the output of this chunk to show up in the dashboard. So I'm not going to include those chunk options that we had in the last code chunk, and instead I'll just put the content that I would like to have displayed in the dashboard. Let's say I want to show the first 6 rows of the Star Wars dataset from the tidyverse. And before we go any further, something that I always recommend when you're working with GitHub Actions is to name every single code chunk. This is a good idea in general to keep your documents a little bit more organized, but it's really important when you're using GitHub Actions because it can be really difficult to debug if you're not naming your code chunks. This is because the log that you'll see from GitHub Actions isn't going to tell you exactly where the error is occurring, but it's instead just going to give you some row numbers. Whereas if you do use code chunk names, it might give you a better sense of where things are breaking. For that reason, I also recommend using separate code chunks for every major portion of the functionality of the code, just to make your life a little bit easier. I'll name this first chunk load packages, and I'll name the second one print Star Wars. Let's go ahead and save this document. I'm going to call this dashboard.qmd. And remember that the name that you choose here is again going to affect the URL that the user uses to access your dashboard. Once I save that, I see a message popping up telling me that the tidyverse is required but not installed. And the reason why I'm getting this message is because we're using renv with this project. So even though I do have the tidyverse installed on my laptop in general, I don't have it installed for this project specifically. The way that renv works is it installs packages within your project repository. Let's go ahead and install the tidyverse into our repository for this project. And when you type install.packages, you'll be asked whether or not you would like to install it into the folder that you're currently working in. So this is the folder on my computer where all these files are located. And then renv has gone ahead and created a folder within that folder where all of my packages for this project will be installed. So I'll type Y to confirm that I would like to install it to this location. And then a few seconds later, the package is installed. Now that we've installed the package, we need to update the renv.lock file. The renv.lock file keeps track of all the packages and the package versions that are being used in your project. If we run the status function from the renv package, we'll see that there are certain packages that have been installed for this project but haven't been recorded yet in the lock file. To fix that, we're going to run the snapshot function from the renv package. And that's going to update this lock file to include all of the packages that we just installed. The lock file just updated, and now if we rerun the status function, we should see a message telling us that the project is in a consistent state. This means that the lock file is fully updated based on all of the packages that are being used in this project. Once that's done, we're ready to render this dashboard to take a look at what it looks like so far. To do that, I just clicked on this render button, and this is what it looks like at the moment. We can see the logo that we selected, as well as the today's top hits title that we typed. The first column has a width of 35%, and the second column has a width of 65%. Similarly, these rows had heights of 10%, 70%, and 20% respectively. And for the column on the left, we didn't manually specify what the row heights should be. So what Quarto did is it automatically selected row heights that made sense for the output that's there. You'll notice that there's a nav bar at the very top, in addition to the navigation bar for the dashboard itself. Let's go ahead and remove that additional nav bar that's on top. To do that, we're going to go to the _quarto.yml file, and we'll make a few small changes here. We'll build on this in future videos, but for right now, we'll keep this fairly simple. I'm going to replace the nav bar with a sidebar, and then I need to change this word left to instead say contents. And then here is where we list the pages that we have as part of our website. So we have that index.qmd file, and we have an about file and a dashboard file. Let's go ahead and add those in. I'm going to make this title look a little bit nicer. And then the only other thing that I'm going to change in this video is the theme. If we want our dashboard to have a custom theme, what we can do is we can add square brackets here, and then we can provide the name of a custom SCSS file, which when you're working with Quarto is a little bit easier than using a CSS file. So I'm going to remove the line that mentions CSS. And what this is saying is that by default, it's going to use the Cosmo Bootstrap theme. But then we've also got a custom SCSS file, and any styles that we mention inside of this custom file are going to take precedence over the styling rules that are part of the Cosmo theme. Let's delete the styles.css file, and instead we're going to create a custom.scss file. And then in the Quarto documentation, under the HTML themes section, there's an example here that talks about how you can customize themes, and they have some example contents of what might go in an SCSS file. I'm going to copy and paste this to my clipboard and then paste it into the custom.scss file, save it, and then let's re-render the dashboard. And we can see that the custom theme has been applied. There's obviously lots of work left to do, but we'll save that for a future video. We now have a minimum working Quarto dashboard example, and we're almost ready to push it to GitHub. Let's add a README for the repository. We'll call that readme.md. And anything that goes inside of the README markdown file is going to be what a user sees when they navigate to the GitHub repository for this project. Let's just add some placeholder content for right now. And the last thing that we need to do before we can upload this is modify the gitignore file. Whenever we render this project locally, the results are going to go into this _site folder. We're going to exclude that from being uploaded to GitHub because we want GitHub Actions to be doing all of the work and generating the contents that will go on GitHub Pages. We still want to have the ability to render this project locally when we want to, but we just don't want those results getting uploaded to GitHub. So we're going to add the _site folder to the gitignore, and we're now ready to push this project to GitHub. You'll need to create a new repository, and then under the repository name, put the same name that you used when you created the project locally. For me, that was Spotify dashboard. Make sure that it's set to public. If you have a free version of GitHub, then you'll need to set it to public, or else GitHub Pages won't actually show your website. You can leave everything else as the default and then click on Create Repository. Next, we're going to push this project to GitHub. There's many different ways that you can do this, but the way that I prefer to do is to copy the first 2 lines of code that are under the Push an Existing Repository section on the project page on GitHub. So I'll copy this to my clipboard, and then I'm going to use git bash. And then once I've navigated to the correct folder location, I'm going to paste in those 2 lines of code and run them. I'm going to commit all of those files, and then I'm going to push them. And then when I refresh this page, I should see those files there. Under this dropdown that says main, click on View All Branches, New Branch, and then create a new branch called gh-pages, which stands for GitHub Pages. Create the branch, then go to Settings, Pages. Under Source, make sure that it says Deploy from a branch, and then under Branch, make sure that it says gh-pages. Then you can click on Actions, and you'll be able to see GitHub Actions working. If you click on one of the workflow runs and then click again, you can actually watch in real time what's being done. The first time that you push, it will take quite a few minutes to get everything set up, but then in the future, once you make pushes, it'll run a lot faster. I'll also note that if you didn't add the new branch called gh-pages very quickly, then this first workflow might fail. because this first workflow is going to be looking for the GitHub Pages branch, and if that branch doesn't exist, you're going to see an error. If that happens and the workflow fails, you'll see a button right here that has the option to rerun the job, and you would click on the rerun button after you have created that branch, and then it should work the second time. A few minutes later, if you go to the Actions page, you should see some green check marks indicating that the workflows have all finished running. And then if you click on one of the ones that says Build and Deployment, you'll see a link that will take you to the website. And here we have it. We can see that the URL is the GitHub username, followed by .github.io, and then a slash, and then the name of the repository, which was Spotify dashboard. If I click on one of the other pages, it adds that on to the end of the URL. And this is what the dashboard looks like. And there we have it. We've now published a Quarto dashboard using GitHub Actions and GitHub Pages. And every single time that we make a commit to this repository, this website is going to automatically be updated without us having to do anything and without us having to run anything locally. In addition to that, it's also going to run those workflows every day at 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And for the simple example that we did here, that's not necessarily super useful, but where something like that starts to become useful is if you're trying to do something like web scraping or pulling in some kind of information that changes on some regular basis, which is what we'll take a look at in the future videos. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.